Marissa, one of the things you allude to in the blind spot and then a book that you wrote, and then also on your website is working smart.
Mhm.
So my brother used to compare me to a dinosaur, big body, small brain. I've always been a hard worker. I just naturally was born a hard worker. I think it took me till I was about 50 to start realizing how I did not know how to work smart.
Mhm.
And I'm 67 and still learning. So it's
Mhm.
an ongoing process. But talk to me about what you've learned about working smart. You talked about
Mhm.
your background, very systematic,
Mhm.
but it had some limitations.
Mhm.
But this is I think this is a drum to beat with our audience is
Mhm.
where are some breakthroughs that you've really seen as far as working smart?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first book that I wrote 3 years after doing executive coaching is called Work Smart. And because I'm like a recovering engineer, it's an acronym. So it's each letter sort of stands for, and this was like my formula. It was the things that I saw people doing that I was like, wow, that's way easier than, or way more important or way more fundamental. So in that book, there's 9 areas that I kind of deem as like what's required to work smart. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. The first one, the first W stands for well. And for a long time, I ignored wellness stuff. Like you realize that like we can ignore it for a period of time and then it bites us, right? It's like a zero sum multiplier if we don't get our wellness practices right. And I've seen that with my clients. When we are sleep deprived, when we're eating junk, when we're not having any time with people we love, when we're not doing any kind of meditative or stillness practice, we have to work harder because we're frankly inefficient and grumpy and ineffective in so many ways, right? So that's an example of like working smart is like what's your fundamentals? What are your fundamentals? So well is one of them. Other examples in the book are being relationship driven. So I told you earlier that I started my career being very deliverables and task and execution oriented, and at some point you realize that that'll get you so far, but if you treat every relationship like a transaction, there's no return on investment for that experience that you've had together, right? And
Yeah.
so the R in work is about being relationship driven, being conscious, recognizing that every single person you meet, it's actually not a lot harder to treat the person as though you may have a relationship that lasts forever. Just to treat them that way.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I naturally love people, but I still have to slow myself down for the relational side because I'm
Right.
very driven. And
Yeah.
I've seen some studies on, people with gratitude and people with relationships seem to live longer.
Yeah.
And you look for me, I'm older than you, but if I look at some of the older comedians like Dick Van Dyke, Carl
Yeah.
Reiner, Mel Brooks, I think they're all in their 90s and they're still
Yeah.
alive. And,
Yeah.
there's photos of them laughing together still. And
Yeah.
so
It's amazing.
that relational side, when you get done with things, it's really the relationships that are the lasting part. Money
Yeah,
comes and
absolutely.
goes, achievements come and go.
Yeah, so there's other like another one is opportunity oriented. Like how are you reframing every challenge into an opportunity? So my perspective on working smart in my formulaic mind, it's like it's a whole series of small come froms that are different than that just barrel through energy, right?
Yeah.
It's being more strategic and being aware of the big picture and kind of carrying that little, like, if you had a little angel on your shoulder, it's carrying that through everything that you do. Because a lot of us, when I first start working with clients, they feel a little overwhelmed. They're like, how am I going to remember to do, or how am I going to find space in my calendar to do all these extra things? It's not about extra things. It's just about the awareness that you bring into all the things you're already doing.
It's funny you talk about the angel on the shoulder. Most young people wouldn't even be aware of that. But there's an angel on one shoulder, there's a devil on the other. Or as one guy I met, he called it the negativity committee in your brain who beats you up on every mistake you've ever made
Yes.
and challenges you or rushes you to make bad
Right.
decisions. You got to hurry, you got to hurry, you got to do it.
Right.
And the angel always seems to speak in a nice quiet voice.
Yeah.
And if you slow down like what you're saying and focus on the relational side, you're going to hear that angel more because,
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
my angel, like, was very, very wimpy compared to my devil. My devil was like sharp and fast and
Oh,
quick
yeah.
and
They
loud.
always are. They always are. They always are.
And my angel was wimpy. So for years, like I don't know, she would run away and leave me alone.
No, no, no. She was still there. She was just speaking quietly because the angel comes from a position that you have free choice.
Right,
And the
right.
angel's there out of love saying, I love you. Why don't you
Yeah,
try this?
yeah, yeah.
And you're like, no, no, I gotta go. And you talk about not having that health piece, the first piece you brought up, the well-being. You don't have that moment to think. And then anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But
It was
but
beautiful though. It's really,
yeah,
and it's true that, part of working smart, like the last chapter is T for tenacity, at the end of smart. And I define tenacity as holding certainty of an outcome in advance of any evidence. So then this is about your aspirations. So it's like you have aspirations, and as you're moving towards your aspiration, it can be really daunting. You can really feel like you're not going to get there. And your job is to be tenacious and be like, I'm going to hold certainty that I'm on my way here in advance of any evidence. Because if you have evidence, it's like you're not being tenacious. You just have evidence, right? So how do you hold the aspiration, and how do you move towards it, gently? And the reality is the angel is what whispers that aspiration, continues to whisper like, yeah, I don't know, that's okay. Through all the setbacks, through all the valleys, through all those kinds of things. And if you're not quiet enough to hear it, then it's very hard to remain optimistic during, when we're doing really important things. They're not easy.
well, let me build on that perspective a little bit. So years ago, I adapted the belief. I came to the conclusion that from my perspective and life experience, persistence was you just go at it and you keep going at it and you keep running into that brick wall. Tenacity is you run into the brick wall and you're like, oh, I ran into a brick wall. Maybe there's another way around. And
Yeah.
that's the quiet voice, the angel is saying, hey, if you go to your left about 30 feet, you can walk around the brick wall.
Yeah.
Whereas the devil's going, get through that wall, hit the wall harder, do it more
Yeah.
time. So
Yeah.
that's something there. I focused on your blind spot book, which is the most recent release. But I am curious whether in any of your work you have come across the practice of, whether you call it mantras, power statements, whatever it might be, but in this quiet time, dictums is what one coach gave me, where and Huberman over at Stanford gets into this of creating new neural pathways
Absolutely.
by repeating certain things. I find that negativity committee
Mhm.
wants me to repeat very negative things about myself and
Yeah.
build those neural pathways so they are multi-lane freeways
Right.
in my brain.
Yeah.
Whereas the quiet voice is saying something quite different that I believe is more truthful and
Mhm.
certainly what I need to focus on.
Absolutely.
Have you done any work or study in that area with those types of
Yeah. Yeah,
that
I
work?
have. So I was the biggest skeptic 9 years ago around affirmations. I used to kind of make fun of like those kinds of things, and I've become the biggest advocate. I make meditations and write affirmations with 90% of my clients, and it is the most transformational thing that I've come up with when you really have to shift. You really have to shift the negative talk track in your mind.
Yeah.
So and the negative talk track is in everybody's mind, but there's certain periods in life where, it just gets on a roll and it just gets very loud, and it's very hard because remember, we always have to remember that our conscious mind is very small and our subconscious mind is always kind of running the show, and our thoughts are always, they're just always surfacing. And our brain is only going to do what it did yesterday because that's kind of its pattern. It's like, did I do this yesterday and I'm still alive? Then cool, let's do this again. And so it's going to constantly just do. And if you want to build a new neural pathway, and if you want to shift a thought pattern, you have to basically repeat to your brain. I always laugh because, like, in artificial intelligence is kind of modeled after intelligence, right? And so what is intelligence? How does our brain learn? Our brain learns by hearing things over and over and over again, and then memorizes an algorithm and a rule associated with that, and then runs off of that. So the only way to change it is to repeat and repeat and repeat the things that you want to feel, want to believe, want to see. And you have to overcome the negativity bias of the entire world. I mean, as a leader, the biggest correlation is positivity and optimism. The world is not positive and optimistic. It's very hard to live in this world. So your brain is being bombarded by all these messages that really feed that negativity track. And you, as an entrepreneur or a leader or a visionary, you have to be in a space of positivity and optimism, which means you have to be listening to enough of those messages for you to counteract what the society is giving you. So what does that look like? I sit down with my clients. Most of my clients will end up with between 80 and 100 affirmations in a 15-minute meditation. I bombard them. So I probably have 300 of my favorite, what I would call helpful beliefs statements. Like one of my favorite is, I always have time for my top priorities. Because everyone's dealing with time scarcity. I don't have time. And if you just repeat, I always have time for my top priorities, what your brain goes is, oh, what's my top priority? It just immediately forces you. And then it's like, oh, let's work on that.
Well, the other part of that is it eliminates things. It realizes that the screaming devil on your shoulder that's saying, you got to do this, you got to do this. You're like, no, I don't have to do that.
Exactly.
That's not my priority. And you have the power to set it aside.
Yeah. So there's like these little one-liners that to me I've collected over the years. And then we write them. We sort of calmly, we adjust them. We make sure to adjust them. I record them for them. And I tell them, you have to listen minimum of 14 days once a day. And I don't have any rules. You don't have to sit still. You don't have to breathe deeply. You can play it in the car. You can play it walking the dog. You can even play it while doing email because the subconscious mind picks it up. It's not for your conscious mind. It will hear it no matter how. So I just like every single day for 14 days. If you don't like it after 14 days, you can quit. Almost all of them continue, some of them for multiple years. Even when they go off of it, they come back and do it again when they feel their brain's kind of gone astray. And what's funny is even my resistors these funny things will happen. They'll say, I'm just 6 weeks later, they'll be like, I'm just really feeling a lot more optimistic. And I'll say, oh, that's really great. Like, what do you think it is? Oh, I don't know what it is. And then I'll say, well, you still listening to your affirmations? And they'll say, well, yeah, but it's not that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're right. It's not that.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. So a few thoughts to share along the same line. I remember hearing decades ago, there was a very successful guy who started an insurance company, and this was 50 years ago or more. But he had the whole company come in. There were like 50 people. And maybe I'm wrong on the number of people, but he would have everybody at the start of every day gather and they would shout 50 times, do it now. Mm. Do it now, do it now, do it now. Mm-hmm. And when I first did dictums, I was being coached by a guy and he had me handwrite certain verses in the Bible. And there's something about the brain connection of handwriting.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but it makes it so much more powerful. Mm-hmm. That was my first experience, but recently I got back into it. My wife had heard something by Joyce Myers on her power statements. So I developed a list of power statements for myself, 10 of them. They're too long by some people's standards, but they're very helpful for me. They hit on 10 very important areas. Mm-hmm. And I memorized them, and I find, and I'm not bragging when I say this, but I find that there are times, I wish there were more times, but there are times in the day where I run into a tough situation and I'm able to pick part of one or say one to remind myself I'm going to get through it.
Absolutely.
And it's very powerful.
And I feel like what they do is they create like, I talk about it being reframe ready. Like, so reframing is a very, very important strategy for,
I like it,
for coping. Right. And if but reframe is a lot of work because here you are, you're kind of stressed, there's a bad situation, you're in sort of a triggered negative emotional state, and now you have to reframe. It's really hard. It's kind of like scratching a record player to stop. It's a very different thing to do. Having said that, if you've seeded some meaningful statements in your mind and they've heard them enough time, it's like your brain brings it for you, and sort of in that moment it surfaces. So in your example, part of your messaging just comes to you in that moment. So that's what you're doing. I think you're seeding all of these kind of like reframes that are ready for the situation, and it's a much more beautiful way to live. And I teach all the strategies I have to my boys. They're 20 and 16, and it's really funny. Just the other night my son said, he had an internship that fell through because of layoffs and all this kind of stuff. And so he's kind of sad. He's got to hustle his way. And he said, I'm feeling like it's really hard. So tonight I'm going to write some new affirmations. I'm going to record them. And a couple days later, he's like, they're totally working. Like, I can't believe how hard, I can't believe how easy this is. Like, why does not everybody know about this hack, And it's just helping him. It's helping him with just that little bit of keeping his brain in the game during a tough time.
It strikes me, particularly in our victim culture that we have so often today, as a reminder to the audience that going back to your cultural biases, but our biases, I'm going to expand that or extend it. This is something you said earlier. We all have different life experiences, and all of us have some pain in those life experiences. Although a buddy of mine, Pat Fitzhenry, says, Dave, I just had a Leave It to Beaver childhood. Which many in the audience may not know what that is, but most of us have some pain, and I know he's got some. Maybe it wasn't his childhood, but later. But we all have that, and it affects our views. So we have to be careful when we're writing these statements. Mm-hmm. These are not hateful statements. Mm-hmm. These are not judgmental statements of other people. Mm-hmm. These are, like you use the term, it's affirmation, something mm-hmm. positive. Mm-hmm. These are the person we want to be.
Absolutely.
Actually, more than who we are.
Yeah.
Often.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah. When I'm getting them to write them, I'm always like, I want you to be just on the edge of like, you have to be on this little edge. Like you can't be on the, like, your brain's going to throw it out. Like there's no way you're that, right? But you have to be on this little, like, this edge of I'd like to be, or I am sometimes, or 1% of the time I'm like this and I want to be like this more. So you're just trying to kind of push that edge of who you want to be. When in your best self, you're writing these affirmations out. What do I believe when I'm in my best state of mind, when I'm my best self, when I'm my best lead, when I'm most inspired? And then you repeat those and it just elevates everything you're capable of doing.
Wonderful. That's great stuff.